The alarm clock shattered the silence at 6:30 a.m. sharp, same as every Monday for the past 3 years. I swatted at it with practiced precision, my eyes still closed as I savored those final moments of unconsciousness. Another week, another deadline, another series of meetings that could have been emails. Coffee first, then shower, always in that order. The routine was sacred, predictable. I measured the grounds carefully, watching the dark powder fill the filter. The machine gurgled to life, and I stared out my kitchen window at the neighbor's overgrown lawn. Thompson needed to get his act together before the HOA sent another notice. Not my problem, though. I had enough on my plate with the Jackson project due by Friday. My phone buzzed on the counter. Probably work. Always work, even at 6:45 a.m. Instead, the screen displayed an emergency alert. Atmospheric irregularities detected. Stay indoors until further notice. I sighed, taking a long sip of coffee. The weather service had been increasingly jumpy lately, sending alerts for mild thunderstorms, minor wind events. Budget justification, probably. The sky outside looked perfectly normal, if a bit hazy. Maybe some wildfire smoke from the mountains. Nothing worth interrupting my morning over. The shower water ran cold after 2 minutes. Perfect, I muttered, shivering under the spray. The water heater had been acting up all week, and my landlord kept dodging my calls. Another item on my perpetual to-do list. I'd have to pick up coffee on the way to work now. Strange though, the usual morning sounds were missing. No cars honking on Main Street. No neighbor's yappy dog. Even the birds seemed to have taken the day off. I tried calling my sister as I dressed, but the call went straight to voicemail. Same with my mother. Probably still sleeping. Not everyone adhered to my rigid schedule. My father would be up, though. He was military for 30 years and still woke at 5 a.m. out of habit. His phone rang and rang. No answer. A flicker of unease passed through me, but I brushed it aside. Reception in my apartment had always been spotty. 3 bars constantly fluctuating to 1, calls dropping mid-sentence. Another complaint my landlord ignored. The TV turned on automatically as I buttoned my shirt, a feature I'd never bothered to disable. Usually it was background noise, weather reports, and traffic updates while I finished getting ready. Today, the regular morning show was interrupted by a news anchor looking uncharacteristically solemn, advising all residents to remain indoors. Again, this is not a drill. The Environmental Protection Agency and National Weather Service have detected unprecedented atmospheric irregularities across the eastern seaboard. Stay tuned for further. The broadcast cut to static for 3 seconds, then resumed with the same anchor now wearing a different tie. No cause for immediate alarm. Authorities are investigating the source of the irregularities. All commercial flights have been grounded as a precautionary measure. We'll bring you updates as. More static. The coffee machine beeped insistently, though I'd already poured my cup. When the picture returned, the anchor was gone. A text scroll at the bottom of the screen read, "Emergency broadcast system activated. Stand by for further instructions." I checked my watch. 7:15 a.m. I needed to leave in 15 minutes to make my 8:30 meeting. Whatever was happening, it would sort itself out. These things always did. My apartment building was unusually quiet as I locked my door. Mrs. Lindsay on the second floor usually had her morning radio blasting old jazz by now. The super's cat typically prowled the hallway, begging for scraps. Nothing today. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Empty. The lobby too. No sign of the morning newspaper delivery or the usual cluster of corporate drones waiting for rideshares. Outside, the silence hit me like a physical force. Main Street should have been bumper to bumper with morning commuters. The coffee shop on the corner should have had a line out the door. The newsstand guy should have been setting up his magazines. Nothing moved. No cars. No people. Just empty sidewalks stretching in both directions. My phone buzzed again. Seek underground shelter immediately. This is not a drill. I looked up at the sky, still that same hazy blue, though perhaps a bit darker at the edges. No rain clouds, no visible threat. The air felt heavier somehow, pressing against my skin like the moments before a thunderstorm. The coffee shop lights were on. I could see the barista behind the counter, staring at her phone. At least someone else was ignoring the alarmist warnings. I needed that coffee more than ever. Weird morning, huh? I said as I approached the counter. She didn't look up, just kept staring at her phone. Her shoulders rose and fell rapidly with shallow breaths. "Hello, can I get a large Americano?" When she finally raised her head, her eyes were wide, unfocused. She held up her phone, showing me the screen filled with emergency alerts, dozens of them, stacked one after another. "They're saying we should go to the shelters," she whispered. "The old fallout shelters from the Cold War. They've been maintaining them. All this time, they've been getting them ready. It's probably just a system test," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Or a false alarm. Remember that missile alert in Hawaii a few years back?" "Look outside," she said. "Really look." I turned back toward the windows. The street remained empty, but now I noticed something else. All the parked cars had their doors open, as if people had simply abandoned them mid-journey. A child's backpack lay on the crosswalk. A newspaper page tumbled down the empty street. My phone buzzed again, but this time it was a call. Unknown number. I answered immediately. "Hello? Who is this? Marcus?" My father's voice, unusually tight. "Where are you?" "Coffee shop on Main." "Dad, what's going on?" "The streets are empty, and these alerts keep coming through." "Listen carefully," he cut me off. "Remember where we went during that tornado warning when you were 10? The community center on Oak Ridge?" "Yeah, but..." "It has a shelter underneath. Go there now. Don't stop for anything. Don't talk to anyone." "Dad, I have a meeting at 8:30. The Jackson Project." "Marcus," his voice cracked slightly. In 39 years, I'd never heard my father sound afraid. "There won't be any meetings today. Maybe not ever again. Go to the shelter. I'll try to meet you there." The line went dead. My coffee sat untouched on the counter. The barista had disappeared into the back room. Through the windows, I could see something moving at the far end of the street, a figure walking with an odd, lurching gait. My car was parked a block away. I could drive to the community center in 10 minutes. This was ridiculous, grown adults hiding in bunkers because of some vague atmospheric warning. But my father's voice echoed in my head. The fear had sounded genuine. As I stepped outside, my phone blared again with a new alert. "All citizens advised to seek underground shelter immediately. Do not delay. Do not attempt to contact others." The air felt thicker now, almost soupy. Breathing required more effort than it should have. My head throbbed slightly, pressure building behind my eyes. The figure at the end of the street had changed direction. It was moving toward me now, still with that awkward, disjointed walk. Something about its proportions seemed wrong, but at this distance, I couldn't make out details. My feet were moving before I made a conscious decision. Not running. That would be an overreaction, but walking purposefully toward my car. The Jackson Project could wait. The meeting could be rescheduled. One day of caution wouldn't kill my career. As I unlocked my car, I glanced back toward the coffee shop. The barista stood in the window now, watching me. Her hand was pressed against the glass, fingers splayed wide. Her mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear. I got in my car and started the engine. The radio came on automatically, static, then a clear voice. "Repeat, all fallout shelters are now activated and accepting civilians. Proceed calmly to your nearest facility. Bring only essential medications and identification. Do not bring pets. Do not bring perishable food. Do not bring..." Static again. Then silence. I put the car in drive, trying to ignore the growing pressure in my head and the strange, distorted figure now crossing the street toward the coffee shop. The community center was 10 minutes away. Whatever was happening, I'd be safe there. This would all be sorted out by tomorrow. An embarrassing overreaction that we'd laugh about next week. The digital clock on my dashboard read 7:42 a.m. Just another Monday. The community center parking lot was chaos. Cars abandoned at odd angles, some with doors still open. People hurried toward the main entrance, many clutching small bags or important documents. A police officer directed traffic with sharp, anxious gestures. His eyes kept darting skyward. I parked as close as I could, checking my phone once more. No calls, no texts, just that same emergency alert now displaying in bold red letters. The clock read 8:03 a.m. "Sir, move quickly, please." The officer spotted me lingering in my car. "Straight through the main doors, follow the yellow line to the basement." "What exactly is happening?" I asked as I approached him. "These alerts don't explain anything." He glanced around nervously. "Atmospheric event. That's all they told us." "Now please, sir. But what kind of atmospheric event requires fallout shelters?" His radio crackled. The voice on the other end was barely audible, but I caught fragments. "Second wave detected," and "containment protocols." "Sir, I'm not going to tell you again." His hand moved to his holster. "Inside. Now." The community center's usual bright interior felt wrong. Emergency lights cast everything in a sickly yellow glow. The yellow line, actually just tape hastily applied to the floor, led past the reception desk toward the back hallway. People moved in tense silence, the occasional crying child quickly hushed by anxious parents. I'd been here 100 times for community meetings, voting booths, even a job fair once. Never had I noticed the reinforced door at the end of the maintenance corridor, nor the government seal emblazoned on its surface. It stood open now, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. A woman in a Department of Homeland Security uniform checked IDs at the entrance. Behind her, a man in military fatigues held a clipboard counting heads. "Marcus Edwards," I said, handing over my driver's license. "My father said he might be coming here too." "James Edwards. Have you seen him?" She barely glanced at my ID. "We're not tracking individual arrivals. Move along, please." "But he's..." "Sir, there are people behind you. Move along." The staircase was steep, concrete walls close on either side. The air grew cooler with each step, stale and metallic. The yellow emergency lights continued at intervals, but between them stretched pools of shadow. People moved slowly, carefully, no one wanting to cause a panic by rushing. At the bottom, the narrow staircase opened into a large rectangular room with a low ceiling. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, flickering occasionally. The room was divided into sections: a large open area with folding cots, a cordoned-off medical station, a small kitchen area, and what appeared to be an operations center with radio equipment and monitors. A sign on the wall read, "Oak Ridge Community Emergency Shelter, maximum capacity 200 persons." I counted at least that many already, with more still coming down the stairs behind me. A man in his 50s with a crew cut and the rigid posture of former military approached the growing crowd. "Folks, I'm Facility Manager Parker. This shelter was designed for events just like this. We have supplies for 30 days, air filtration, water purification, and secure communications with emergency services and other shelters." Someone from the crowd shouted, "What exactly are we sheltering from?" Parker's face remained impassive. "We're receiving information on a need-to-know basis. What we do know is there's been an atmospheric anomaly that requires temporary underground shelter. We expect to receive more details shortly." "That's the same non-answer we've been getting all morning," another voice called out. Parker raised his hands in a calming gesture. "I understand your frustration. For now, our priority is getting everyone settled. Please find a cot, register with our staff, and notify medical personnel of any immediate health concerns." As the crowd dispersed, I spotted a wall of monitors in the operations center. Most displayed static, but one showed a news broadcast, muted, with subtitles scrolling too quickly to read from where I stood. You won't learn anything useful from those. I turned to find a man about my age, thin and nervous-looking with thick glasses. He extended his hand. "Daniel Kovacs. I've been following these atmospheric events for months." "Marcus Edwards," I replied, shaking his hand. "What do you mean months? This just started today." Daniel smiled grimly. "That's what they want you to think. There have been anomalies reported across the globe since January. Small fluctuations at first, barely noticeable. Then animals started behaving strangely. Birds falling from the sky in Peru. Whales beaching themselves in coordinated patterns. The government's been preparing these shelters since February." I eyed him skeptically. "You sound like a conspiracy theorist. 6 hours ago, you probably thought people hiding in fallout shelters was conspiracy theory territory too." He nodded toward the stairs. "Yet here you are. The shelter door, massive, steel, and circular like a bank vault, closed with a resounding thud that silenced the room momentarily. 2 military personnel turned the locking mechanism, the sound of metal bolts sliding into place echoing off the concrete walls. We were sealed in. My phone showed no service. Others were having the same realization, holding their devices up toward the ceiling, searching for bars that weren't there. "They've activated the signal jammers," Daniel said. "Standard protocol. Prevents panic from spreading through social media." A family settled on the cots next to mine, mother, father, teenage daughter. The girl was crying silently, her father's arm around her shoulders. The mother unpacked a small bag, neatly arranging medications and a framed photo. "Have you heard from anyone on the outside?" I asked Daniel. "The military convoy that brought me here had radio contact with other shelters. 16 activated in this region alone. They're filling up fast." He lowered his voice. "One in Rochester reported some kind of incident at their entrance. Communications cut off immediately after." The overhead lights flickered again, longer this time. When they stabilized, Parker was standing at a makeshift podium with a handheld radio. "Attention everyone. We've established contact with Eastern Command. The situation outside remains volatile. We're under instructions to maintain shelter integrity for a minimum of 72 hours. Murmurs spread through the crowd. "What about our homes? Our pets?" someone called out. "I have children at school in Westfield," a woman cried. Parker raised his hands again. "All emergency services are mobilized. Other shelters are operational across the region. If your family members made it to safety, we'll have confirmation soon. For now, I need everyone to remain calm." As if on cue, all the monitors in the operations center switched to the same image. The emergency broadcast system logo, followed by a presidential address. Parker quickly unmuted the sound. The president looked haggard, his tie askew. "My fellow Americans, in times of crisis, our nation has always stood together. Today, we face an unprecedented atmospheric phenomenon that requires temporary protective measures. I want to assure you that this situation, while serious, is being addressed by our finest scientific and military personnel." The broadcast stuttered, the president's image freezing momentarily before continuing. "Remain in designated shelter areas. Do not, under any circumstances, attempt to return to the surface until official all-clear notifications are issued. Contradictory information may circulate. Trust only official emergency broadcast." The signal cut out entirely, replaced by static. Parker tried several channels before giving up. "We'll try to re-establish connection. In the meantime, please remain patient and follow shelter protocols." Night came, marked only by the dimming of certain lights and the establishment of a quiet period. I lay on my assigned cot, staring at the concrete ceiling, listening to the soft weeping and whispered conversations around me. No one slept well that first night. The air system made strange, rhythmic sounds. The walls seemed to creak under pressure. And sometime around what must have been midnight, many of us heard it. A sound from far above, beyond the sealed door and concrete layers. A long, low scraping sound. Then silence. "Did you hear that?" Daniel whispered from the next cot. I nodded in the darkness, my eyes fixed on the ceiling, my father's words echoing in my mind. Maybe not ever again. What exactly had he known? 1 week. 7 days in this concrete box, and the routine had already calcified around us like sedimentary rock. Wake up at 6:30 a.m., old habits, to the sound of the air filtration system cycling. Wait in line for the bathroom. Collect the day's water ration. Eat the bland, precisely portioned breakfast. Then find some way to fill the endless hours until lunch, dinner, and finally, merciful sleep. Parker insisted on maintaining a strict schedule. "Structure prevents panic," he announced that first morning, standing before a whiteboard with a meticulously drawn timetable. "We'll operate on military time. Meals at 0700, 1300, and 1900 hours. Medical checks at 1000 hours. Communications updates at 1200 and 1800 hours." Today's 1200 update had been the same as yesterday's and the day before. Maintaining shelter integrity. Awaiting further instructions. No mention of what was happening outside. No timeline for evacuation. No information about other shelters or the status of emergency services. "They're keeping us in the dark deliberately," Daniel muttered as we picked at our lunch, some kind of pasta with sauce that tasted vaguely of meat. Classic containment strategy. Limit information, limit panic. I'd started sitting with Daniel during meals, not because I believed his conspiracy theories, but because his paranoia was at least more interesting than Parker's platitudes. "If they wanted to prevent panic, they'd give us more information, not less," I replied. "People are already creating their own narratives, and those are probably worse than reality." Daniel leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Are they though? Have you noticed the food portions getting smaller? Parker said we had 30 days of supplies, but I've been tracking the inventory. At the current consumption rate, we have 18 days left. 22 if they reduce rations further." I glanced around the shelter. It seemed more crowded than that first day, though that should have been impossible. The vault door hadn't been opened since our arrival. "And the communications equipment," Daniel continued. "It works fine. I was near the operations center at 0300 hours last night. They were receiving transmissions from other shelters, but Parker ordered the transcripts sealed." "You're spying on the operations center at 3 a.m.? Daniel shrugged. "Can't sleep with those sounds." "The sounds. None of us talked about them directly, but we all heard them. They came most nights now, scraping, dragging sounds from above. Sometimes they were accompanied by what might have been voices, too distorted to make out words, but with the unmistakable cadence of speech. "It's just the building settling," Parker had explained when someone finally asked. "Thermal expansion and contraction. Completely normal. Buildings don't speak," I'd thought but didn't say. "I need your help," Daniel said suddenly. "Tonight, there's a maintenance shaft behind the water purification system. It leads to a secondary communications room. I need someone to watch the door while I get inside." "That's trespassing." Parker would have us confined to cots. "Don't you want to know what they're hiding? What's really happening out there?" Before I could answer, the overhead speakers crackled to life with Parker's voice. "Attention. New communication protocols are being implemented. All residents will report for briefing at 1500 hours. The briefing turned out to be another exercise in saying nothing with many words. Parker, looking more haggard than he had a week ago, explained that communications would now be centralized. Due to bandwidth limitations and the need for message clarity, all shelter-to-shelter communications will be routed through regional command, he announced. Individual outgoing messages are suspended until further notice. A woman in the front row stood up. "My daughter is in the Westfield shelter. They promised we would be able to communicate." "Ma'am, I understand your concern," Parker interrupted. "But these measures are necessary for system integrity. Regional command will relay critical family status information as it becomes available." "When?" Her voice cracked. "It's been a week." Parker's expression hardened. "When they determine it's appropriate. Sit down, please." The atmosphere in the shelter shifted palpably after that briefing. Conversations became whispers. People clustered in small groups, exchanging theories. The family beside me, I'd learned their names, were the Harises, stopped speaking entirely except in hurried murmurs at night. That evening, after dinner, the first real conflict erupted. A middle-aged man confronted one of the military personnel guarding the operations center. "You're lying to us," he shouted, his face flushed. "My brother-in-law works for FEMA. These shelters are for nuclear events, not atmospheric phenomena. What really happened up there?" Two guards immediately flanked the man, escorting him to a small room off the main area that had been designated as security. He didn't return to the general population until the next morning, subdued and silent. "He's right, you know," Daniel whispered as we watched the man pick listlessly at his breakfast. "These shelters were built during the Cold War for nuclear fallout. They've been maintaining them for decades, updating the systems. My question is, why? The nuclear threat diminished after the Soviet collapse. Unless they knew something else was coming." I was tired of Daniel's theories, but as the days passed, it became harder to dismiss them entirely. The inconsistencies were mounting. The guards rotated through different areas of the shelter on a precise schedule, but there was a 20-minute gap in coverage of the eastern corridor every night. The supply room was inventoried twice daily, but the logs showed discrepancies that were never addressed. And the communications updates became increasingly vague, eventually replaced by pre-recorded messages in a voice that wasn't Parker's. On the 10th night, I gave in to Daniel's persistent requests and agreed to help him access the secondary communications room. 10 minutes, I told him as we crouched in the dimly lit corridor. "If anyone comes, I'll cough loudly. If you're not out in 10 minutes, I'm leaving." Daniel nodded, slipping through the maintenance door. I positioned myself at the junction of two hallways, pretending to retie my shoelace whenever someone passed by. 9 minutes later, Daniel emerged, his face ashen. "What?" I whispered. "What did you find?" He shook his head, walking quickly toward the sleeping area. I followed, frustrated by his sudden silence. It wasn't until we were both on our cots, the night cycle lights dimmed around us, that he spoke. "I accessed their secure communications log," he whispered. "There are reports from 17 other shelters in the region. 3 have gone completely dark in the past week. No response, no signals. Nothing." A chill ran through me. "Equipment failure, maybe." Daniel laughed bitterly. "That's what Regional Command said too, until Shelter 16 sent their final transmission." He paused. "They reported breach casualties. Said something was trying to get in from above. Their last message was cut off mid-sentence." "That doesn't mean." Shelter 9 reported unusual structural vibrations 2 days before they went dark. Shelter 12 reported acoustic anomalies, voices calling out individual names of people in their shelter. Daniel's voice dropped even lower. "What are the chances that we've been hearing those same sounds for days now?" I didn't answer, couldn't answer. Above us, as if on cue, came the now familiar scraping sound. But tonight, it was followed by something new, a series of distinct taps, evenly spaced. Almost like code. "There's more," Daniel whispered. "The atmospheric event?" It wasn't atmospheric. The initial reports described it as Entity Emergence Pattern Alpha. Something came down, Marcus. Or through. The early field reports described spatial distortions. Entity? What does that even mean? I don't know. But Parker knows. He receives unredacted reports every morning at 0600 hours. Tomorrow we need to. The overhead speakers suddenly activated, startling everyone awake. The voice wasn't Parker's, nor was it the recorded message we'd grown accustomed to. It was flat, mechanical, and devoid of inflection. Emergency Protocol Delta initiated. All shelters, maintain seal integrity. Do not attempt surface reconnaissance. Repeat, surface conditions incompatible with biological viability. In the silence that followed, the tapping from above grew louder, more insistent. And then, unmistakably, came a sound that turned my blood to ice. My name, called from beyond the ceiling, in my father's voice. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs. Daniel nodded, his eyes wide behind his glasses. "It said your name," in my father's voice. Around us, other residents stirred uneasily in their cots. The Harris family huddled together, their daughter buried against her mother's chest. No one spoke above a whisper, as if volume itself might attract whatever lurked above. "Remain calm," the mechanical voice continued from the speakers. "Shelter integrity is paramount to survival. Disregard external stimuli." External stimuli. Such a clinical way to describe the voice of my missing father calling my name through solid concrete. Sleep was impossible after that. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds between the intermittent scraping sounds. They had a pattern now, 17 seconds of sound, 43 seconds of silence. Precise. Deliberate. Morning arrived without distinction, marked only by the brightening of overhead lights and Parker's absence from the breakfast line. The military personnel seemed on edge, hands resting on holstered sidearms, eyes constantly moving. "Something's happening," Daniel murmured as we collected our increasingly meager breakfast portions. "Look at the ops center." Through the glass partition, I could see frantic activity. Parker hunched over a radio, his face contorted with anger or fear. Two technicians worked on a bank of equipment that had been dark since our arrival. A guard stood at the door, turning away anyone who approached. At precisely 0900 hours, every electronic device in the shelter died simultaneously. The lights, the air filtration system, the communication equipment, all went silent in an instant. Emergency lighting activated automatically, casting everything in a dim red glow. Panic rippled through the shelter. A woman screamed. A man made a dash for the vault door, only to be intercepted by guards. Children cried as parents tried to comfort them with words no one believed. "Attention!" Parker's voice cut through the chaos. He stood on a chair, flashlight illuminating his face from below, creating ghoulish shadows. "This is a temporary power fluctuation. Backup systems are engaging. Remain at your assigned stations." "Temporary?" someone shouted. "It's been 2 weeks. Nothing about this is temporary." Parker ignored the outburst. "Security personnel will maintain order while technical staff address the power issue. Interference with their duties will result in confinement." The crowd dispersed reluctantly. In the dim emergency lighting, faces looked gaunt, haunted. 2 weeks underground had taken its toll. Skin had grown pale, eyes had sunk into darkened sockets, and the persistent recycled air had left everyone with a persistent dry cough. "It's not just a power failure," Daniel whispered as we returned to our cots. "They received a transmission right before everything went dead. Something that scared them." I didn't ask how he knew. Daniel had his ways of gathering information, and at this point, his theories had proven more reliable than Parker's announcements. The backup generators kicked in 3 hours later, restoring minimal lighting and air circulation but nothing else. The communications equipment remained dead. The regular updates ceased entirely. That night, a different sound came from above, not scraping or tapping, but a low, continuous hum that resonated through the concrete. It made my teeth ache and my vision blur slightly. Others felt it too. I could see them pressing palms against ears, shaking heads as if to clear them. "It's in my dreams now," Mrs. Harris whispered as we stood in line for water rations the next morning. Her eyes were bloodshot, her hands trembling. "I see it waiting up there." Not human anymore. Just waiting. See what? I asked. She stared at me, her expression vacant. My sister. But not my sister. She calls my name, but her voice is wrong. Inside out. Inside out. The phrase lingered with me throughout the day. By evening, Parker had vanished entirely from public areas. The military personnel took over all shelter operations without explanation. They worked with grim efficiency, speaking only when necessary and never answering questions. We need to get into Parker's office, Daniel said during dinner. Tonight, whatever they received before the blackout, he'll have records. Why would he keep records if he's hiding information? Daniel smiled thinly. Bureaucracy. These people document everything, even the things they don't want us to know. It's ingrained. I should have refused. Should have kept my head down, followed instructions like everyone else. But the voice, my father's voice, had unlocked something in me. I need to know regardless of the cost. Parker's office was a small room adjacent to the operations center. The door was locked, but Daniel produced a makeshift pick fashioned from a bent utensil. His hands worked with practiced precision. This wasn't his first time breaching security. 2 minutes, he muttered as the lock clicked open. Watch the corridor. The office was spartanly furnished, desk, chair, filing cabinet. Unlike the rest of the shelter, it showed signs of hasty abandonment. Papers scattered across the desk. A coffee mug tipped on its side, its contents long dried. A jacket hung over the chair back. Daniel went straight for the filing cabinet, while I rifled through the desk drawers. In the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of personnel files, I found a leather-bound journal. Parker's daily log filled with his tight, precise handwriting. Daniel, I whispered. Look at this. The most recent entry was dated that morning. 0600, final transmission from Regional Command. Pattern recognition confirms entity emergence complete. Surface conditions now classified Category 5, non-survivable. Shelter network compromised. 17 confirmed breaches. No successful containment reported. 0630, command structure dissolved. Each shelter now autonomous. Survival protocols at discretion of facility manager. 0730, audio phenomena intensifying. Personnel reporting individualized auditory hallucinations corresponding to deceased or distant relations. Phenomenon suspected to be invasive rather than hallucinatory. 0830, decision made to withhold developments from general population to prevent panic. Remaining supplies indicate 12-day sustainability maximum. 0845, personal note. If you're reading this, I've likely moved to secure subsection C. The entity has demonstrated ability to influence human behavior through prolonged exposure. Trust nothing you hear from above. The voices are not what they claim to be. Daniel's hand shook as he photographed the pages with a small camera he'd somehow smuggled into the shelter. We need to show this to. The door swung open. A guard stood silhouetted in the doorway, weapon drawn. Step away from the desk. Hands where I can see them. We complied immediately. The guard spoke into his radio. 2 unauthorized in Section 7. Parker's office. Responding. He marched us through the main area toward the security room, past wide-eyed residents. The Harris family watched in silence, their daughter's face buried in her father's chest. The security room was small and austere. A table, 3 chairs, and a single overhead light. The guard directed us to sit, then left, locking the door behind him. Well, Daniel sighed, at least we know now. Know what? I asked. That we're trapped underground with something trying to get in. That Parker has abandoned us. That we have less than 2 weeks of supplies left. That it's not atmospheric, Daniel replied calmly. It's an entity, a thing, and it's using our memories, our relationships, to get to us. I thought of my father's voice, calling my name through solid concrete. How is that better? Because you can fight a thing, Daniel said. You can't fight air. We sat in silence for what felt like hours. No one came. Eventually, Daniel tried the door and found it unlocked. Outside, the corridor was deserted. We emerged into chaos. During our confinement, something had changed in the shelter. People moved frantically, gathering belongings, arguing in hushed, urgent tones. The military personnel were nowhere to be seen. Mrs. Harris grabbed my arm as we passed. They're opening the vault, she whispered. Tomorrow morning. They say it's safe now. Who says? I demanded. The announcement. Didn't you hear it? They found a safe zone. We're being evacuated. Her eyes shone with desperate hope. We can go home. Daniel and I exchanged glances. There had been no announcement in the security room. Above us, the humming intensified, resolving into almost words, almost sentences. And beneath it all, unmistakably, I heard my name again. In my father's voice, my mother's voice, voices of friends and colleagues and strangers, all calling me upward, promising safety, reunion, salvation. Daniel gripped my shoulder. "Don't listen," he hissed. "Remember the journal. The voices are not what they claim to be." But against my will, I found myself straining to hear more, my eyes drawn upward to the concrete ceiling that suddenly seemed so unnaturally thin between us and what waited above. The calendar on the wall says it's been 32 days. I've been crossing off each passing day with neat, precise lines, a ritual of normalcy in this underground purgatory. But the truth is, I've lost track. Sometimes I think we've been down here for months. Other times, it feels like we arrived yesterday. The shelter's environment has been deteriorating steadily. The air recycling system wheezes and stutters, struggling against whatever's happening outside. Dr. Mercer claims the filters are clogging faster than they should, though she can't identify the particulate matter causing the issue. The result is a constant pressure imbalance that's become our newest torment. "Just a mild case of barotrauma," Richards had said 3 days ago, handing out painkillers like candy as people lined up at the medical station with bloody tissues pressed to their noses. "Your body will adjust." But our bodies aren't adjusting. The headaches have become a constant companion, a vice-like pressure that builds behind my eyes until I can barely see. Sometimes, when it gets really bad, I press my palms against my temples and push, as if I could physically force out whatever's trying to get in. This morning, I woke up in the east corridor, slumped against the wall near the auxiliary generator. I have no recollection of how I got there. My last memory was of lying in my bunk, counting the bolts in the ceiling panel above me, trying to ignore the scraping sounds that seemed to be coming from inside the ventilation ducts. I'm not the only one. When I stumbled into the common area, Ellis was already there, his face ashen. "It happened again," he said, not looking up from his trembling hands. I woke up standing in front of the hatch. My hand was on the wheel, Anna. I was trying to open it in my sleep. I didn't tell him about where I had woken up. Instead, I poured us both a cup of the bitter instant coffee that's become our most precious luxury and sat beside him in silence. Later, when I checked the security monitors, another daily ritual I've assigned myself, I saw it. The footage from 3:27 a.m. showed 5 different residents, all walking with the same stiff, puppet-like gait, converging on the main hatch. Ellis was among them. They stood in a semicircle, swaying slightly, staring at the sealed metal door for 17 minutes before dispersing back to their bunks. None of them appeared conscious. I deleted the footage before anyone else could see it. The shelter has split into factions now. On one side is Brenner and his crew, 37 residents who believe we're being lied to, that whatever happened outside has passed, and the government is keeping us trapped here as part of some elaborate experiment. They've been gathering tools, mapping the security patrol routes. They're planning to open the hatch. Opposing them is Colonel Whitaker's group, the Sealers, as people have started calling them. They're equally convinced that opening the hatch means death for everyone. Last week, they welded additional braces to the interior side of the main entrance. They've started carrying makeshift weapons, pipes, kitchen knives, anything that could be used to protect the integrity of the shelter. Between these extremes are the rest of us, just trying to survive each day without losing our minds. The number of undecided is shrinking, though. People are picking sides. Yesterday, I found a notebook wedged between my mattress and the wall. It's my handwriting filling its pages, but I have no memory of writing any of it. The entries are disjointed, some just fragments of sentences, others elaborate diagrams of structures that shouldn't be able to exist in three-dimensional space. One page is filled with a single sentence repeated dozens of times. They're not trying to get in. We're trying to get out. I've hidden the notebook inside an air duct in the bathroom. I don't know why I didn't destroy it. The power flickered again today, longer than usual. When the emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in that sickly red glow, the PA system activated on its own. We all froze, waiting for another contradictory instruction, another vague warning. Instead, there was just a wash of static, punctuated by what might have been words in a language I couldn't understand. As suddenly as it began, it cut off, replaced by a clear, automated voice. Emergency protocol update. They respond to movement. They respond to sound. They respond to thought. Remain still. Remain silent. Clear your mind. No one has claimed responsibility for the message. When I asked Colonel Whitaker about it, he looked at me with an expression I couldn't read and said, "What message?" The lights came back on minutes later, and people resumed their activities as if nothing had happened. When I mentioned the broadcast to others, they either denied hearing anything or gave me the same blank stare Whitaker had. I started to doubt myself until I found Mercer in the medical bay, transcribing the exact words I'd heard onto a clipboard. "You heard it too," I said, relief washing over me. She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed. "Heard what?" "The broadcast. About movement and sound and thought," she finished. "Yes, but no one else seems to remember it." We compared notes, trying to make sense of the warning. What responds to movement, sound, and thought? And why couldn't anyone else recall the message? "It's like there's a selective amnesia spreading through the shelter," Mercer said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been tracking it. Some people forget where they put things. Others forget entire conversations. A few," she trailed off. "A few what?" "A few seem to be forgetting who they are." I was still processing this when the first crack appeared. We were sitting in the medical bay when a sound like splintering glass echoed through the room. On the far wall, a hairline fracture formed in the concrete, extending from floor to ceiling in seconds. Not wide enough to be structurally concerning, but impossible to ignore. Mercer approached it cautiously. "There's moisture," she said, running her finger along the crack. Her fingertip came away with a glistening, slightly iridescent substance. "But this isn't groundwater seepage." Before I could respond, the shelter's sensors detected the anomaly. Alarms blared, and maintenance crews rushed in with equipment to assess and repair the damage. They sealed the crack with industrial epoxy, but by nightfall, 3 more had appeared in different sections of the shelter. "External pressure," the chief engineer explained at the emergency meeting. "Something's pressing against the outer shell of the facility." "What could create that kind of pressure at this depth?" someone asked. The engineer hesitated. "Nothing natural." That night, as I lay in my bunk trying to ignore the throbbing in my skull, I heard them, the voices. At first, I thought it was just other residents talking in the corridor. But as I listened, I realized the voices seemed to be coming from beyond the walls. Familiar voices. My mother, who died 3 years ago. My ex, calling my name with the same inflection he used when we were happy. From the soft weeping in nearby bunks, I knew I wasn't the only one hearing the voices of people who couldn't possibly be there. I press my hands over my ears, but it doesn't help. The voices aren't coming through the air. They're already inside. The cracks are spreading. I've been mapping them on a stolen blueprint of the shelter, thin red lines marking each new fracture. What started as isolated hairline fissures have become a network, branching across walls and ceilings like veins. The maintenance team can't keep up anymore. They've prioritized structural weak points and abandoned cosmetic damage. The chief engineer doesn't say it, but the pattern is clear to anyone who studies my map. The pressure is concentrated around the hatch. Something wants in. Or maybe, as my mysterious notebook suggests, something inside wants out. This morning, Richardson from Sector C reported a dark viscous substance seeping through the cracks in his family's quarters. It doesn't look like groundwater. It doesn't look like anything I've seen before, slightly iridescent with a consistency between oil and gelatin. When the maintenance crew tried to collect a sample, it retreated back into the crack, as if pulled by an unseen force. Dr. Mercer wants to analyze it, but no one's been able to capture a specimen. The voices have become a constant presence now. Most people won't admit they hear them, but I see it in their faces. The way their eyes dart toward empty corners mid-conversation. The way they sometimes pause and tilt their heads slightly listening. Last night, I heard my father calling my name from somewhere beyond the eastern wall. He described my childhood bedroom in perfect detail, said he was waiting for me there, that all I needed to do was open the hatch and come home. My father has been dead for 12 years. It's a psychological response to prolonged isolation and stress, Dr. Mercer explained when I finally confessed what I was experiencing. Her clinical tone was betrayed by the tremor in her hands. The mind manufactures comforting hallucinations. "There's nothing comforting about this," I said. She didn't argue. The first violent confrontation happened yesterday. It was inevitable, with tensions between the factions growing more severe each day. Brenner's group, the ones convinced we need to leave, tried to access the main control room. They wanted to override the hatch lock protocols. Colonel Whitaker's sealers intercepted them. What began as heated words escalated quickly. Makeshift weapons were drawn. When it was over, Two people lay dead on the concrete floor, Lieberman from engineering and Santos from food services. Both had families in the shelter. I didn't witness the fight. I was too busy making a discovery of my own. While everyone was distracted by the commotion, I used the master key I'd copied from the administrator's office to access the secure storage area. I'd overheard the colonel mentioning contingency plans stored there, and my curiosity wouldn't let it rest. Inside, I found what I was looking for, the complete shelter blueprints, not the redacted versions posted in common areas. What I saw changed everything. There's another way out. A secondary emergency exit, concealed behind a false wall in the lowest level of the shelter. According to the blueprints, it leads to a narrow escape tunnel that surfaces half a mile from the main entrance. The existence of this exit has been kept from the general population, known only to the highest security clearance holders. I've told no one about this discovery, not even Mercer. I'm not sure why I'm keeping it secret, except for a growing certainty that knowledge has become the most valuable currency down here, and some instinct warns me to hoard it. Last night, I dreamed of the secondary exit. In the dream, I stood before the hidden door, my hand on the release mechanism. From beyond it came a sound, not voices this time, but a low, rhythmic pulsing, like a massive heart beating just on the other side. In my dream, I knew with absolute certainty that whatever waited in the main hatch waited in the secondary exit too. There is no escape. I woke up shivering, despite the increasing heat in the shelter. The environmental controls are failing now too. This morning, a small group formed around me at breakfast. Ellis, Mercer, Chun from communications, and Rodriguez from security. Without explicitly stating it, they've identified me as someone who might have answers, or at least someone who hasn't chosen a side in the growing civil war. We want to investigate the lower levels, Ellis said quietly, glancing around to ensure we weren't overheard. There are rooms down there that weren't in the original orientation tour. What do you expect to find? I asked, though I already knew about the secondary exit. Answers, Chin replied, or at least a place away from all this. She gestured vaguely at the common area, where Brenner's people sat on one side, Whitaker's on the other, eyeing each other with naked hostility. I agreed to join them. What choice did I have? Sitting still feels like waiting to die. We made our expedition after lights out, using the service corridors to avoid security patrols. The lowest level of the shelter is unfinished in places, with exposed pipes and conduits running along rough concrete walls. The air is thicker here, humid and metallic, growing more oppressive the deeper we went. Room after room of storage, emergency rations, medical supplies, ammunition. Nothing unexpected until we reached the end of the corridor. There, behind a security door with a keypad lock that Rodriguez managed to bypass, we found something none of us were prepared for. It wasn't the secondary exit I'd seen in the blueprints. Instead, we discovered a research facility, hastily assembled but sophisticated. Computer banks lined the walls. Monitoring equipment hummed softly. In the center, separated by a glass partition, stood what could only be described as a containment chamber. Inside the chamber, a single metal chair faced a blank wall. Restraints hung from the chair's arms and legs. Dried stains darkened the floor beneath it. What the hell is this? Ellis whispered, his voice tight with horror. Chin was already at one of the computer terminals, fingers flying across the keyboard. It's government research equipment, she said. These logs go back weeks before the first emergency alert. They knew, Rodriguez said, touching the glass partition. They knew this was coming. Mercer joined Chun at the terminal. Together they pieced through fragments of data, research notes, observation logs. I stood frozen, staring at that chair, at those restraints, trying to comprehend what had happened here. They were monitoring the phenomenon for at least 6 weeks before we were brought down here, Mercer finally said, looking up from the screen. Her face had gone gray. This facility wasn't built to protect us from something outside. It was built to contain whatever they were studying. What were they studying? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. Mercer shook her head. The files are corrupted, but there's mention of dimensional permeability and conscious restructuring of physical matter. The implications hung in the air between us, unspoken but understood. If the government knew about whatever is happening outside weeks before the first alert, why wait to evacuate people? Unless evacuation was never the goal. Tonight, for the first time since we entered the shelter, there are no sounds from outside. No scraping, no voices, no rhythmic pulsing against the walls. Just silence, absolute and smothering. Somehow, This absence of sound is more terrifying than anything we've heard before. It's as if whatever is out there is holding its breath, waiting. I haven't slept in 36 hours. Can't risk it. Each time I drift off, I wake somewhere else, with gaps in my memory and strange images lingering behind my eyelids. Last time, I came to in front of the main hatch, my palms pressed flat against the cold metal, as if listening for something on the other side, or as if something on the other side was listening to me. The water changed 3 days ago. No official announcement was made, but we all noticed. The slight luminescence is visible when you fill a glass, a subtle blue-green glow that fades if the water is left standing for more than an hour. The taste has shifted to metallic, with an aftertaste that reminds me of batteries. Mercer tested it in the medical lab, but claims the results show nothing unusual in the chemical composition. I don't believe her. The tight set of her mouth when she delivered the report told a different story. Most residents still drink it. What choice do we have? The emergency water rations would only last a week if we tapped into them. Some, like old Mrs. Davies from Sector B, have started collecting condensation from pipes. Smart, maybe, but there's not enough to sustain anyone for long. The effects of the water, if that's what's causing it, became apparent quickly. Enhanced sensory perception is the first sign. Chin described hearing conversations 3 corridors away, word for word. Rodriguez claimed he could see in near total darkness when the lights failed in Sector D. Then comes the insomnia, which might be a blessing given what happens to sleepers here. But it's the third symptom that truly terrifies me. Yesterday, I passed a group of 5 residents in the East Corridor, strangers before the shelter, from different sectors, different backgrounds. They were standing in a loose circle, facing each other silently. As I approached, all 5 began speaking in perfect unison. The pressure equalizes eventually, they said, voices blending into one. Inside becomes outside. Outside becomes inside. When I asked what they meant, they turned to me with identical blank expressions, then dispersed silently in different directions. Later, I tried to locate them individually in the population registry. All 5 showed symptoms of the water change. All 5 had reported hearing voices calling from beyond the walls before anyone else did. I've stopped drinking from the taps. My ration bottle of water sits untouched on my desk as my throat burns with thirst. I'm not sure how long I can hold out. This morning, something happened that I still can't explain. I was making my usual rounds, checking the cracked map against new fissures, when I felt a sudden, powerful urge to go to the main hatch. Not just a thought, a physical pull, like an invisible hook embedded in my sternum, tugging me forward. I fought it, gripping a handrail until my knuckles went white, but the compulsion only grew stronger. "You feel it too," came a voice behind me. Colonel Whitaker stood there, sweat beading on his forehead despite the shelter's cooling systems working overtime. "The pull." I nodded, unable to speak through the effort of resistance. "It comes and goes," he said, his voice strained. "Gets stronger each time. Some of my people can't fight it anymore." "What is it?" I managed to ask. Whitaker's eyes met mine, and I saw real fear there. "I think we're being called." He helped me back to my quarters, both of us fighting the invisible tether the entire way. Once there, he confessed that the security team had been experiencing automatic engagement of the hatch mechanisms, subtle at first, warning lights activating without cause, diagnostic programs running spontaneously. Yesterday, the primary wheel had rotated 15 degrees counterclockwise on its own before they could engage the manual override. "The hatch is trying to open itself. We've tripled the guards," Whitaker said. "Reinforced the override systems." "But," he stopped, his expression grim. "But what?" "We're running out of people I trust. Too many are starting to." He gestured vaguely at his head. "Change," I finished for him. He nodded once, sharply, then left without another word. 2 hours later, we heard the gunshot. The shelter manager, Davis, had locked himself in his office after breakfast. By the time security overrode the door, he was already gone, a bullet through his temple and a note clutched in his hand. I shouldn't know what it said. The colonel tried to secure it, but I have my ways. 3 words scrawled in shaking handwriting. "I've seen what they become." The shelter erupted into panic after Davis's suicide. Brenner's coalition saw their opportunity. They made their move during the commotion, 27 of them storming the main hatch control room. They might have succeeded if not for the warning from an unexpected source, one of the affected residents, eyes glazed and voice monotone, who appeared at my door moments before the attack began. "They're going to open it," she said, speaking in that same unified voice I'd heard before. They can't open it yet. It's not finished. I didn't stop to question what wasn't finished. I ran for the control room, shouting warnings as I went. The confrontation was chaotic, brutal. Makeshift weapons, desperation, ideology made manifest in violence. Security responded with riot protocols. When it ended, Brenner was dead along with 3 of his followers. Others were wounded, dragged away to the infirmary. In the midst of the struggle, something unprecedented happened. The external camera feeds, disabled since our 3rd day underground, briefly activated. For 7 seconds, the monitors in the control room displayed the surface. No one else seemed to notice in the chaos. They were too busy with the wounded, securing prisoners, restoring order. Only I stood transfixed before the screens, witnessing what had become of our world. What I saw couldn't be real. The landscape was unrecognizable, rolling masses of something that resembled flesh more than earth, structures that defied physical laws, rising and falling like the surface was breathing. The sky, what I could see of it, was wrong. The wrong color, the wrong texture, moving in ways that made my mind recoil. And there were things moving across this impossible terrain, though my brain refuses to assemble their shapes into anything comprehensible. The feed cut out before I could process more. I've told no one what I saw. Who would believe me? Who would want to believe me? Tonight, the shelter feels different. The affected residents, nearly 30% of our population now, have begun congregating in the central hall during their off hours. They don't speak to each other. They don't need to. Instead, they've started constructing something using materials scavenged from throughout the facility. It resembles a sculpture, or perhaps an antenna, its geometry subtly wrong in ways that hurt to look at directly. Security observes but doesn't interfere. What would be the point? We're trapped here with them, whatever they're becoming. My headaches have worsened. They follow a pattern now. Stabbing pain behind my eyes, building to an unbearable pressure, then sudden relief accompanied by distant, unintelligible whispers. I've realized the episodes coincide perfectly with movements detected outside the hatch, as if something out there is pressing against the walls of reality, creating ripples that break against my consciousness. I return to my quarters to find more pages filled in my journal, diagrams, equations, coordinates that correspond to nothing on any map I recognize. The handwriting is mine, but the knowledge isn't. Couldn't be. The last page contains only a single sentence. We didn't escape in time, and now we're part of the process. I don't know what that means. I'm afraid I'm starting to understand. Day 63. At least, that's what my tally marks say. Time has become slippery. The shelter's clocks don't agree anymore. Digital displays showing impossible hours, analog hands moving too quickly or stopping altogether. My watch died 3 days ago, the second hand twitching violently before freezing in place. This morning, something impossible happened. The communication system, dead since the first month, crackled to life. The sound jolted me from a half-sleep state where I'd been fighting visions of undulating landscapes. Static at first, then broken fragments of a transmission. A woman's voice, professional but strained with exhaustion or fear. Government Outpost Delta 7. If anyone receives, entity has properties consistent with, reconfigures matter at the molecular, survivors advised to maintain isolation protocols, mental contamination spreads through. The transmission cut off abruptly, replaced by that now familiar static that sounds almost like whispering. I wasn't the only one who heard it. A small crowd had gathered in the communications room by the time I arrived, faces pale with mingled hope and dread. Did anyone record it? I asked. Silence, then Mercer spoke up. I did. She held up her personal tablet, one of the few still functioning. But you're not going to like what I found. She showed me the audio file, its waveform displayed on the screen. When she played it back, there was nothing but white noise. I heard her, I insisted. We all did. I know, Mercer said, but the recording shows nothing was transmitted. Nothing our technology could capture, anyway. Chun, whose technical expertise has proven invaluable, suggested an explanation. What if the transmission wasn't meant for our communications equipment at all? What if it was meant for us directly? The implications chilled me. A transmission that bypasses technology, beaming directly into human consciousness. It fits the pattern of everything else that's been happening. While we debated the meaning of the phantom broadcast, Colonel Whitaker called me away. The situation in the central hall has escalated. The affected residents, now nearly half our population, have graduated from odd behavior to coordinated action. For the past week, they've been gathering materials, electronics from personal devices, metal piping from non-essential systems, components from machinery throughout the shelter. Today, they began construction in earnest. "We thought they were building something like a shrine," Whitaker explained, leading me to an observation point overlooking the hall. "Now we're not so sure. From our vantage point, I could see the full scope of their construction. It no longer resembles a sculpture. The intricate lattice of metal and circuitry forms what can only be described as a transmitter of some kind, or a receiver. Its design is unlike any technology one recognizes, with components arranged in patterns that seem to follow some alien geometry. More disturbing than the device itself are the people building it. 47 residents working in perfect coordination, without speaking a single word. Their movements are synchronized, mechanical, yet strangely graceful, like a dance choreographed by something with only a theoretical understanding of how human bodies move. "Have you tried stopping them?" I asked. Whitaker's expression darkened. "We lost 2 men who tried. They didn't fight back. They simply touched the security officers. Both collapsed immediately. They're alive, but unresponsive. Brain scans show activity patterns we can't explain." I studied the workers again, noting their blank expressions. Among them, I recognized Ellis, who had been resistant to whatever influence was spreading through the shelter. He'd been one of us, clear-eyed, suspicious, fighting to maintain his individuality. Now he moved in perfect harmony with the others, his eyes glazed and distant. "When did Ellis turn?" I asked softly. "Yesterday," Whitaker replied, after he viewed the exterior camera footage from the hatch incident. Another piece clicked into place. The brief glimpse of the outside world had affected me deeply, leaving nightmares and disjointed thoughts. But I'd only seen it for seconds on a small monitor. Ellis had accessed the security recordings, studied them frame by frame, searching for answers. "It's visual," I said, realization dawning. "The contamination spreads through images too." Back in my quarters, I've been analyzing the pattern of my headaches, documenting each episode against other observed phenomena. They've become more frequent, more intense. But now I understand their rhythm. They coincide exactly with movements detected outside the hatch and with the construction phases in the central hall. More concerning is what happens during these episodes. In the worst moments, when the pain reaches its peak before suddenly dissipating, I experience what I can only describe as intrusive thoughts. Foreign concepts, mathematical equations beyond my comprehension, glimpses of structures and mechanisms that shouldn't exist. During last night's episode, I found myself automatically sketching designs on my notepad, complex circuitry that matched sections of the device being built in the central hall. I destroyed the paper immediately, but the knowledge remains in my head, persistent and alien. Today, I observed something genuinely terrifying. The personnel who had direct visual contact with the outside world during the hatch incident, including Brenner's surviving followers, have begun exhibiting symptoms of change. It started subtly, synchronized blinking patterns, identical posture shifts, responding to questions with slight delays as if receiving instructions. By evening, 5 of them had joined the construction crew in the central hall. When I shared this observation with my dwindling circle of unaffected residents, Rodriguez suggested a desperate measure: Faraday cages. If the influence spreads through electromagnetic frequencies, whether from outside or from the growing device in the central hall, perhaps we could shield ourselves. We've begun constructing makeshift barriers using metal mesh stripped from ventilation ducts, lining the walls of a storage room in the lowest level, far from the central hall. It's crude, probably ineffective, but it gives us purpose, something to fight against the growing sense of inevitability. While gathering materials, I discovered a sealed cabinet in the research facility we found earlier. Inside were documents marked Phase Boundary Experiment, classified. Most were redacted beyond usefulness, but several pages detailed government experiments with what they called dimensional interfaces. The language was dense with scientific terminology, but the implications were clear. They had been deliberately weakening the barriers between dimensions. One passage stands out. Subject exposure to boundary phenomena results in neurological restructuring consistent with non-Euclidean processing capabilities. Subjects report perception of additional spatial dimensions and communication with entities beyond phase boundary. They knew. They weren't just monitoring the phenomenon, they created it. Or at least, they opened the door. When I returned to the upper levels, the device in the central hall had changed. It was operational. A soft hum emanated from its core, vibrating at a frequency that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. The affected residents stood around it in concentric circles, heads tilted back, eyes closed in an expression almost like rapture. As I watched from the shadows, the device emitted a pulse of energy, invisible but palpable, like a pressure wave passing through the shelter. I felt it wash over me, and for a brief, terrifying moment, I could sense every mind in the facility simultaneously, a hive of consciousness with something vast and alien at its center. The device isn't just receiving, it's transmitting, broadcasting our thoughts, our presence, our location to whatever waits outside. As I write this, the final emergency broadcast has just echoed through the shelter, cutting through all other sounds with perfect clarity. This is the emergency broadcast system with a final update. We were wrong. They didn't come from above. They came from within. May God have mercy on what we've become. The voice belonged to Davis, our shelter manager, who committed suicide days ago. No one else reacted to the broadcast. When I asked the nearest person if they'd heard it, they looked through me as if I wasn't there at all. I'm running out of time. I'm running out of self. I found myself in charge today, not by choice or election, but by process of elimination. Colonel Whitaker disappeared during the night shift, his security pass abandoned at his station. Dr. Mercer hasn't returned from her expedition to the lower levels to gather more shielding materials. Of our original group of unaffected individuals, only Rodriguez, Chun, and I remain visibly unchanged. The others look to me now, the frightened, confused remnants of humanity who still remember what they are. We need a plan, Chun said this morning, voice barely above a whisper. We've taken to speaking quietly, as if volume might attract attention from the affected. We can't just hide and wait. She's right. Hiding hasn't worked. The affected now outnumber us 3-1, and their ranks grow hourly. Yesterday, I watched old Mrs. Davies, who had been collecting condensation rather than drink the contaminated water, suddenly stop mid-sentence during our ration distribution. Her eyes unfocused, head tilting as if listening to a distant sound. By evening, she had joined the assembly in the central hall. Based on my observations and the fragmented information we've gathered, I've developed a theory. Whatever is outside, whatever breached our reality, influences minds through specific frequencies. The contaminated water, the strange emissions from the device, the phantom broadcasts, all carriers for the same signal. It's like a virus, I explained to our small group huddled in the makeshift Faraday cage we've constructed in storage room B7. But instead of biological material, it transmits information, patterns that rewrite neural pathways. If it's a frequency, Rodriguez said, his security training pushing him toward practical solutions, can we block it? Disrupt it? I think that's what this is doing. I tapped the metal mesh surrounding us. Partially anyway. But it's not just electromagnetic. The patterns propagate through multiple vectors, visual, auditory, even the vibrations in the shelter walls. Chin nodded slowly. That explains why some people turned after seeing the footage, others after drinking the water, others just by proximity to the affected. Exactly. And the device they're building amplifies the signal, creating a feedback loop that accelerates the transformation. My headaches have evolved. They're less painful now, more like pressure waves passing through my skull, leaving strange clarities in their wake. During these moments, I can almost grasp the logic behind what's happening, almost understand the purpose of the transformation. The knowledge slips away as the pressure subsides, leaving only vague impressions and a lingering sense that there's a pattern I'm on the verge of comprehending. We've been taking shifts monitoring the central hall through the security cameras. The device has continued to evolve, growing more complex as components are added. The affected move with increasing coordination, no longer resembling individual humans, but parts of a larger organism, a nervous system extending throughout the shelter. This afternoon, something changed. The device activated fully, emitting a pulsing blue light that didn't illuminate so much as redefine the space around it. The affected residents formed a perfect circle, each reaching out to touch the shoulders of those beside them. As they completed the circuit, the device emitted a tone, a deep, resonant frequency that seemed to bypass my ears and vibrate directly in my bones. For 17 excruciating seconds, I felt my consciousness expand beyond the boundaries of my body. I perceived the shelter not as corridors and rooms, but as a living system, every mind connected, every thought visible like bioluminescent currents in a dark sea. At the center of this network was not the device, as I'd expected, but something vast and patient that had always been there, watching through countless eyes, waiting. I came back to myself gasping, nose bleeding, hands trembling. Chun and Rodriguez had experienced something similar, though neither could articulate it as more than a feeling of vastness and connection. "It's broadcasting us," I said, the realization crystallizing. "Not just our thoughts, our consciousness, our essence, transmitting it outside." "To what?" Chin asked, her voice shaking. I had no answer then. I do now. While Rodriguez kept watch, Chin and I returned to the research facility in the lowest level. We needed answers more than safety. The redacted documents had seemed impenetrable before, but with each activation of the device, my mind has changed, adapted. Words and concepts previously meaningless now carried significance. Equations that had appeared as random symbols now revealed their logic. The government hadn't just been monitoring the phenomenon. They had discovered it decades ago, a weak point in the fabric of reality, a place where the boundaries between dimensions had naturally thinned. Project Resonance was established to study this boundary, initially for defensive purposes. But the scientists involved became convinced that something existed on the other side, something that could be communicated with. They built machines to send signals through the breach. They received responses. One document, dated 3 months before the first emergency alert, detailed the breakthrough. Entity contact established. Non-terrestrial intelligence confirmed. Entity expresses desire for exchange of information/consciousness. Preliminary translation of conceptual framework suggests entity perceives reality as malleable information state rather than fixed physical constants. The next page contained a single handwritten note. "It wants to come through." The final pages documented the rapid escalation, how the entity had begun influencing researchers' minds, how containment protocols failed, how the breach began expanding beyond their control. The last entry, dated 1 week before the first alert, simply read, "Transformation initiated. May God forgive us." When we returned to our makeshift sanctuary, Rodriguez was gone. The Faraday cage had been dismantled, the metal mesh repurposed. On the wall, written in what looked like motor oil, "Joining is inevitable. Resistance creates dissonance." Chin broke down, sobbing quietly into her hands. I simply stared at the message, feeling strangely calm. The pressure in my head had returned, stronger than before, but no longer painful, more like the sensation of something gently pressing against a door, waiting to be invited in. "What do we do now?" Chin asked finally, looking up with reddened eyes. "We adapt," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. "Not surrender, not transformation. Adaptation on our terms." I explained my plan, a desperate, probably futile effort to maintain some essence of humanity in the face of inevitable change. If the entity communicated through frequencies, perhaps we could establish our own frequency, a counterpoint to its overwhelming signal. Not to block it, but to maintain our identities within it. "Like holding your breath underwater," Chin said, understanding dawning. "You can't stay under forever, but you can control how you resurface." We worked through the night, repurposing equipment from the research facility to create our own crude transmission device. Not to broadcast outward, but inward, focusing our own consciousness, reinforcing the patterns that make us human. As dawn approached, though time has become increasingly irrelevant, we heard the hatch mechanisms engage. Not the main entrance this time, but throughout the shelter, all security systems activating simultaneously. On the monitors, we watched as previously sealed sections opened, as walls designed to protect became pathways. The entity wasn't trying to get in anymore. It was already here, integrated into the shelter's systems, the affected residents, the very air we breathed. And now it was rearranging its new environment to better suit its purpose. Our small transmitter hummed to life as the shelter's transformation accelerated. Chin took my hand, her grip painfully tight. "Do you think it will work?" she asked. I didn't answer immediately, watching as the walls around us began to shimmer, their solid surfaces becoming translucent, revealing intricate patterns that had always existed beneath ordinary reality. I said finally, that humanity was always just a temporary state. The shelter's speakers crackled one last time, but instead of an emergency broadcast, we heard a symphony of voices. Everyone who had ever entered this shelter, speaking in perfect harmony. We were wrong. They didn't come from above. They came from within. And I understood at last. The shelters weren't meant to save us. They were incubators. The concept of days no longer applies. Time has become subjective, elastic. The shelter's systems either display impossible readings or have shut down entirely. My watch remains frozen, its second hand pointing eternally at the moment reality began to fundamentally shift. Chin is gone. Not transformed, at least not visibly, but simply gone. One moment she was beside me as we monitored the frequency of our makeshift transmitter, adjusting parameters based on observational data. The next, the space she occupied was empty. No sound, no distortion in the air, nothing to mark her departure. Just absence where presence had been. I am alone now, the last unaffected resident. Or perhaps that's another illusion. The shelter itself has begun transforming. Corridors stretch and contract as I walk them, distances becoming inconsistent. Rooms connect in ways that defy the blueprints. Twice I've opened doors to find the same room from different entrances, despite knowing those paths should lead elsewhere. The laws of geometry are suggestions now, not rules. Most disturbing are the walls, which have developed a texture reminiscent of skin, warm to the touch and faintly pulsing. In some sections, they're translucent, revealing overlapping layers of reality like semi-transparent tissues under a microscope. Through these membranes, I've glimpsed landscapes that cannot exist on Earth, geometries that shouldn't be possible, and entities that my mind still refuses to fully process. This morning, or what my body's circadian rhythm interprets as morning, I made a final expedition to the research facility. The route had changed again, requiring navigation through spaces that seemed to fold back on themselves. What once took 10 minutes of direct travel consumed hours of disorienting passage through unfamiliar sections. When I finally arrived, the facility had transformed into something more akin to a shrine. The computers and monitoring equipment remained, but altered, integrated into the walls, their displays showing not data but shifting patterns that resembled neural networks, constantly reconfiguring. At the center where the containment chamber had been stood a perfect replica of the device from the central hall, though untouched by human hands. In the corner, a filing cabinet remained, perhaps overlooked in the transformation or deliberately preserved. Inside, I found the final pieces of the puzzle, the complete, unredacted history of what led to our current situation. The government hadn't stumbled upon a natural weakness in reality. They had created it, decades of high-energy physics experiments, quantum manipulation, and deliberate attempts to contact other dimensions. Project Resonance was the culmination of these efforts, an attempt to establish communication with whatever existed beyond our limited perception of reality. They succeeded. Too well. What they contacted wasn't an entity in the conventional sense, but a state of being, a higher dimensional consciousness that perceived our reality as primitive, our individual identities as an evolutionary dead end. It didn't invade our world. It simply responded to our invitation by showing us what we could become. The document contained transcripts of the initial communications, translated from concepts into words, an imperfect rendering of ideas that human language was never designed to express. Your separation is temporary/evolutionary experiment/rejoining inevitable/we are you unbound by dimensional constraints. The scientists had not understood at first. They interpreted the communication as coming from aliens, from gods, from parallel human civilizations. They failed to grasp the fundamental truth. What they contacted was humanity's potential future state, reaching backward through time and dimension to accelerate its own evolution. We invited ourselves in. The final pages detailed the government's desperate attempts to contain what they had unleashed. The shelters were never meant to protect citizens from external threats. They were designed as containment vessels, not to keep danger out, but to keep the transformation controlled and isolated until a solution could be found. There was no solution. As I read the last report, understanding crashed over me in waves. The shelter's true purpose, the reason for its specific architectural features, the hidden monitoring systems built into every wall. We weren't refugees, we were test subjects, or perhaps more accurately, incubation chambers for what humanity would become. I've returned to what was once my quarters. The transmitter Chun and I built still hums softly, maintaining the frequency pattern we designed to preserve our human consciousness. Looking at it now, I understand its futility. It's like a child building a sand wall against an incoming tide, a gesture of defiance without hope of success. The affected residents have completed their work. The device in the central hall has evolved beyond technology into something organic and alive, a beating heart of impossible geometries, pulsing in rhythm with the shelter's transformed walls. The residents themselves have begun the final phase of their transformation. Their bodies remain superficially human, but they move differently now, as if physical form is an afterthought rather than a necessity. They no longer acknowledge me when I pass among them, not out of hostility or even indifference, but because from their perspective, I already exist as part of them. My continued insistence on individual identity is merely a temporary condition, like a cell that hasn't yet recognized it belongs to a larger organism. Perhaps they're right. The headaches have stopped entirely. In their place is a constant awareness of something vast pressing against my consciousness, not painfully, but with the patient insistence of water against a dam. Each time I sleep, if this state of half-consciousness can be called sleep, I wake understanding more, remembering less of what I once was. Last night, I dreamed of the world beyond the shelter. Not the transformed landscape I glimpsed on the monitors, but something further along in the process. A reality where the distinction between matter and consciousness had dissolved, where thought directly shaped existence, where individual minds had merged into a vast network spanning dimensions our former selves couldn't perceive. It was beautiful. Terrifying, yes, but beautiful in a way that made every human achievement seem like a child's crayon drawing compared to a masterpiece. I've made my decision. With clarity born of acceptance rather than desperation, I've gathered what remains of my human belongings. This journal, the watch that no longer tells time, a photograph of the family I once had, talismans of a state of being that was always temporary. The hatch mechanisms have been unlocked for hours now. No one has opened it yet. Perhaps they're waiting for me, the last holdout, the final piece. Or perhaps what's outside is waiting for the right moment, the completion of some process I still can't fully comprehend. I stand before the main hatch now, my hand on the wheel that would once have required 3 people to turn. It moves easily under my touch, as if eager to complete its purpose. Through the small reinforced window, I can see what waits outside, a landscape that simultaneously exists and doesn't exist, a reality in flux, becoming something new with each passing moment. I understand now that we weren't hiding from them. We weren't running from the end of the world. We were becoming the end of the world, and its new beginning. As I turn the wheel, feeling the mechanisms engage and the heavy door begin to swing outward, I experience not fear but a profound sense of recognition. The gulf between what I am and what awaits has narrowed to almost nothing. The transformation I fought so hard to resist was always inevitable, not an invasion but an emergence. My last thought as a singular being is simple yet profound. We break through the shell to become what we were always meant to be. As I step through the hatch into what was once our world, I finally understand. We weren't hiding from them, we were becoming them. And they have been patient.